Hello, everyone. My name's Chris Bolser. I'm a preservation technician at the Library of Congress Preservation Research and Testing Division. I'm here with Dr. Fenella France and Dr. Andrew Forsberg, and we're really excited to show what we've been working on for most of the pandemic and beyond. A little overview. We're dealing with James Madison's original notes to the U.S. Constitutional Convention 1787. These are considered the most complete notes of the federal convention that really shaped the U.S. Constitution. We used mostly multispectral imaging to combine image stacks in order to do additional processing and get different spectral responses to reveal redactions, and we also did a lot of transcription work on it. So this consists of more than 650 pages of data, which was a lot to go through. And there were, but we mostly focused on a few regions of interest. Most of the time it was redactions, but then we got this idea, let's take this project and move it on and tell a story from it. So what's great about Mirador is that we're able to combine a lot of the processing with the work. A lot of times it was we get a question, we do the work, we fill out a report. But now we're actually able to introduce this to a broader audience. We're able to introduce this to other scientists, researchers, curators, and even just the general public, whoever's really interested in this stuff. So not only does it allow us to tell stories, it really allows us to show off our work. Like you can see in the examples here, we've got the annotations in the middle half of the screen that basically make it easier for the reader and really match up word for word what Madison was writing down. On the right side, we've got some examples of the different multispectral images that we've taken and how we can adjust and pick specific wave bands to view. And we've also got an example of one of our principal component overlays using pseudocolor image rendering that really helped bring out some of the redacted words. So some examples of work that I've had the pleasure of doing over the pandemic is, this one's a fairly simple example. We're just looking at how many different inks we see here. It's pretty obvious. We can already see that Tuesday's probably written in a different ink than the rest of the text. But if you look a little bit closer, we start looking at the redactions on Tuesday, and we can see that that's even reacting differently than the rest of the ink, even though it looks similar. Another example we have here, John Dickinson was one of the delegates, part of the Constitutional Convention. During the debate, there was question as to whether or not the national legislature should have the power to revoke laws in certain cases. However, he was against that because the wording was just too vague. And his big thing was just he wanted any form of power to be not ambiguous. It was so in this case, the word cases, which you can kind of see in the very colorful image, the green text, if you follow it closely, it does spell the word case, and then at the end, you can definitely see an S. So originally it was to leave the case as doubtful would be opening another spring of discord, and he was for shutting down as many of them as possible. Another example of some of the work that we've done is, this one was a fairly long phrase, and as you can see, most of the text that we're focused on the right side, it doesn't have a heavy redaction, but you do kind of start getting into that gray area of where do words end and begin. So we can see as soon as the blank of, that part seemed pretty easy to make out. But then you focus on the word signing, and not knowing this, I had to go and kind of do some detective work. So I'm looking at similar words from the same, I try to look from the same day because things change up often, whether it's the intensity, the handwriting in general. And we were able to kind of piece together the word and see that the beginning of the word signed and the end of giving really do fit the word signing. So in this case, as soon as the signing of the Constitution being signed by all members except for the three famous Mr. Randolph, Mr. Mason, Mr. Jerry, who declined, they basically resolved the convention. And the reason why the three did not sign it apparently was because they were not happy that the Bill of Rights wasn't included in the Constitution. This was one of the challenges that we had regarding a lot of the redactions. We have a word here that I really just couldn't pinpoint. So again, we go back, we start looking at other words, and we look at the tails, we look at the ascenders, and some things just don't fit. So towards the end of the word, I'd say the third end, we see a long tail and then a very tall ascender. And there's no letter that should be that shape. So what we can infer here is that this is likely a case where Madison wrote down a word, tried to write on top of it, and decided to just strike it out. But because this was some sort of adverb, or adjective, there was no replacement for this word. So it was just completely expunged from his notes. So aside from showing what we've been able to do, we can also do a little bit of storytelling, which has been great. So this paragraph is from Nathaniel Gorham via Madison's notes. The number of states will also increase. Kentucky, the province of Vermont, the provinces of Maine and Franklin will probably soon be added to the present number. The context here was regarding how many representatives each state should have in the national legislation. And this was, I believe, before the idea of a House and a Senate really came to be, because there are people arguing for 2 and there are people arguing per capita, number of people per capita. So in this case, we have Nathaniel Gorham, who is the leader of the Continental Congress at this point, and also a delegate from Massachusetts. Maine was a part of Massachusetts, and a lot of people from Massachusetts seem to oppose their independence. So was Nathaniel Gorham for Maine being its own state? Were these just examples that Madison was writing down in relation to Gorham's words? And if that's the case, then with Kentucky being a part of a territory of Virginia, how does that play out there? So, and the other fun one was Franklin. I've actually never heard of this state before, but this was potentially going to be our 14th state. So it's modern day Northeast Tennessee. Originally, it was offered to really help pay for the debts of the Revolutionary War. John Sevier was actually a lieutenant colonel from North Carolina, appointed to kind of help establish things there and really corral the people back in. Instead, he ends up being elected as the first president and governor of Franklin, or at that time, Frank Land. So they applied for statehood in 1785. They only come up with 7 votes, but to try to appease more people, they actually changed the name to Franklin and even try to get Benjamin Franklin to endorse them. Unfortunately, since that still falls through, they decide to accede to North Carolina, and 2 years after they accede, they become part of the Southwest Territory. And 6 years later, the state of Tennessee is born and John Sevier is elected the first general. So these are kind of some of the things that we really wanted to be able to show, even if it's not directly part of what we do. It gives others the chance to branch out with our work and really add to our data, add to our collection, and really make this information accessible to everyone and valuable to more people, hopefully.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, when we hi, my name is Andrew Forsberg, also within the same division with Chris. When we came to this particular project, it was on the back of an earlier one based in Mirador 2, where our annotations, simply through the way that Mirador 2 was structured, not entirely friendly for external programmatic access and direction. We had embedded our own scientific annotation system within Mirador 2, which was good and had pros and cons. But with Mirador 3 and IIIF 3, we saw this as the potential for a clean slate and to deal with issues like the one that Chris has here, where I think it was 675 double-sided pages, more or less. But each one of those has upwards, up to a dozen, sometimes 20 multispectral image layers, potential layers, and principal component analysis fragments and details like you can see there on the right, and which Chris has shown in previous slides. And then there is all the other analysis too. So this was the potential was here for us to have the imaging work done within Mirador 3 and IIIF 3 dynamically generate these manifests and canvases and annotation layers from our own scientific research databases, rather than try to code everything in by hand, which was not going to be feasible for a project of this size. And we had there are this mixed experiences, mostly super, just amazing, really lovely. Could you go to the next slide, please, Chris? Just in very little time at all, was able to pull together an API for creating manifests, canvases, and annotations. With the transcriptions that Chris has tirelessly been putting together. And the option for other annotations, either ones that are in the public domain or not, and notes and so on. And I think I haven't had a chance to get to the other sessions. I'm hoping to review them later, but with IIIF 3, the working with it is a pleasure, just even in terms of the naming conventions and the degree of nesting. So if you could just go to the next slide, Chris, please. And I will sum up my bit. One of the things that wasn't so much fun, and this was true as of Mirador 3's Beta 6, which was when we were working on this prototype, just to make sure that this was doing what we thought it could do, was that canvases, at least at the time, couldn't be dereferenced in the way that the annotations were. And I don't think this is required by spec, so it's not a fair expectation. And it, yeah, with 695 double-sided pages spread out over all those dates, and many images potentially on every single one of them, that was not going to be a viable approach. So we'll have to look into other ways of either grouping and organizing, or seeing as we can now dynamically generate these manifests every single time someone makes a query. I mean, there's no need to have them all loaded up there, so that's nice. Some weird stuff with the annotations, targets, syntax as well. But the main things were that the massive reduction in boilerplate and redundancy to nesting depths, not having work on so many workarounds just to have things looking around about right, like with the annotation suffixes. But the single most important thing, at least from my perspective for our division, was that we could return to our original intent, which was to give researchers like Chris a tool to tell their stories, that there was very little, if any, double handling. We'd create the research data, load it up, generate a manifest from it, and it's done. It opened up other internal conversations, say with conservators, and the potential more for external researchers, because we are now more compliant with IIIF spec rather than needing to use an internal embedded annotation system. And we could pull all of that logic and thinking, those systems back out side of Mirador and on a different application layer, so that we can do fun things like pull up data for research that has been done on, let's say, pigments that were active or available in this region in the 1600s, you know, according to the ways of the Silk Road and what we knew. I want to see all of our resources on that, and those can then be generated into a manifest and viewed in much the same way as Chris is doing here with the Madison notes. So so more arbitrary types of research, poking around in the data. There are many other things, but I am running out of time. It was mostly about getting the best tools for each job, and with Mirador 3 and the IIIF revisions here, we can pull those tools out, use them where they're most appropriate, and let Mirador IIIF do what it's good at, with the representing the images and annotations. Next slide, and over to you, Fenella. No, this is still me, I think. Nope, this is you, Fenella.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to say there's been a lot of work. I see Glenn on the call, and who helped work with us early on as we were working with this. And we did a lot of work with Mirador 2 and forced it with Sea Dragon and a number of other applications to do things with scientific annotations. And so we've been really delighted with Mirador 3 and the different capacities that we can add in with this. So as you've seen, we're doing a lot of work with the spectral imaging and the layers and the pseudo-color redactions, and really looking at how we can dynamically generate the API documents from cultural heritage and scientific research data, and just all of the, as everyone, three of us have said, just the surprises, the delights, the challenges, just makes IIIF a wonderful community to work with. So I will close there and open up to questions. Thank you. A huge thanks to Chris and Andrew.
Thank you.
So I'm looking at Whova. It doesn't look like there's any questions now, but we can give folks a moment if they want to type them, or if you just want to unmute yourself and ask, that's fine too.
It's the end of a long day.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there are no questions, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and just remind everyone that if you do end up with questions, you can follow up via email or via the Whova platform. So thank you to all the speakers. It was great to see the presentation. Thank you for everyone who's attending. And I hope you all have a great evening or afternoon, or I guess morning, depending on where you are. So thanks all for attending. Have a good one.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.